What's up, Drizzler Defeaters? I'm Quackers Co., and this is the fish fry for November 5th, being held at the spawning grounds. Our cookware composition is the Sploosh-O-Matic, the Luna Blaster, the Undercover Brella, and the Splat Charger. There are so many walls and spawning grounds that it helps to just get them painted as quick as possible, because eventually everything will make its way to that center of the map, and it'll be helpful to have all those mobility options at hand. And with the short range of this composition, we will be pushing onto those docks. So remember, all the three fingers at the docks have different movement options. You can jump in between these two fingers, and you can also swim through the grates, using them as a shield to block the salmonids. And if you're on the extra long finger, if you lead all the salmonids onto one side, it opens up the other side, and then you can shoot your way all the way to that wall and just climb right up. And if you didn't know, where the Snatcher spawns is where he'll eventually bring those eggs back to. So if you see a Snatcher heading out from the basket area, just remember, he'll eventually be bringing those eggs back. So at this point, I'd say the best method is to paint outward from the basket in at least one direction, and then once the match starts, you can move your way back towards the basket area, painting extra walls and seeing what bosses have spawned. If it's an easy lure boss, make sure that you get them to the basket and get some quick eggs early on in the wave. And just like normal, make sure you use your specials, not just for taking out bosses or lessers, but you can also just use it for giving yourself a little extra mobility on the map. So make sure you do your best to cut corners on this map just to make it a little bit easier. And I know glowflies can be a nightmare, but this composition is made... Now I know glowflies can be a nightmare, but this composition... I know glowflies can be a nightmare, but this composition is... I know glowflies can be a nightmare, but I promise you, this composition is made for it. As long as we maintain... But for real, as long as that DPS weapon can hold that line of damage, that way no chum can get through, it's a little bit easier to hold your ground here. And then whenever eggs are there that need to be collected, you need to move that line of damage forward so that way people can collect them. Glowflies here is all about positioning. The Charger should focus a lot of their damage onto the Goldie, while the Blaster can focus their damage right there in the middle of the Horde. And then the Brella player can bounce between shooting on the left side or on the right side. But remember to try to not open up that Brella. There's a chance that you'll just get bounced out into the crowd. And I know that it always feels like a struggle. But as long as you can maintain that line, this composition should help you feel confident in winning a rush wave. And this platform also works really well for grillers. But with grillers, it's always helpful to remember to stun them right by the basket. That way it's really easy to collect eggs. So try to make sure if you're going to shoot that shot, make sure it's at the right moment. And when it comes down to it, when you need to get those eggs, make sure you use a wall hang that gets the grillers really far away. So try to think of all those different shortcuts that you can take here on spawning grounds. If you need to get away, you can easily get away, but make sure you don't spend all that time running. That damage needs to be caused, and those eggs need to be put in. And a little tip for Salmon lids, you don't need to get all the way into their shield before it activates. You can just activate it with a little bit of it. But on a high tide, you gotta make sure you take out those priority targets. Even if it's on a wave 1, that special activation will help you get those splats on those bosses. And it'll help keep your pay grade too. Some of the corners on high tide do have you jumping over water, just keep that in mind. On a low tide, we always need to make sure we lure as many bosses close to the basket as possible. But it's easy to get overran, so if we need to, we can escape, but we just need to have our turf covered. Especially during a Cohawk charge. Having as much turf painted as possible will help get you over to those turrets, that way you can cause that damage. Having more turf covered always helps out here on low tide. And at a certain point in low tide, we no longer can care about shoreline bosses because we need to collect those eggs. So low tide may be a little hairy, but as long as we lure bosses and use our mobility, we should be able to get it cleared. Alright, let's get into the cookware. Our first cooking utensil is the Sploosh-O-Matic. The Sploosh-O-Matic has the highest DPS of all the shooters in the whole game. It also has really incredible coverage. Its downfall, of course, is its range. You have to get right up to something if you want all those shots to hit. But this weapon does come in a real good pinch whenever you need to cover a flipper-flopper zone. It's also a fantastic weapon for taking out stingers. And with its short range, make sure you squid surge up a fish stick and use the opposite rotation trick to take them out real quickly. Our second cooking utensil is the Luna Blaster. The Luna Blaster has a bit of a slow fire rate, but it has a massive explosion that it causes. And just like the Sploosh-O-Matic, it's got a very, very short range, so you might find yourself getting really close to some things. But where this weapon really shines is when you're on a medium height platform. That way that whole blast can take out massive amounts of lessers in each shot. The more enemies that you can fit into that blast, the quicker that you can take them out. Just like the Sploosh-O-Matic, this weapon is really good for taking out stingers, but with its slow fire rate, try to give yourself an exit. Our third cooking utensil is the Undercover Brella. The Undercover Brella should definitely be more of a boss splatting weapon. That shield does really well at blocking multiple types of damage, but you need to remember to close it so that way you don't get bumped around too much. Use the Brella to push towards shoreline bosses and support your teammates. And if you're taking out a fish stick, I had problems taking it out from the top of it. So if you do, try to take it out from below. Our last cooking utensil is the Splat charger. Everything about a charger is easier to use when you have more range. If you're pushing towards shoreline bosses, you're going to be having problems. So if you do go towards shoreline bosses, try to use a special or make sure you have an exit. This weapon's damage is needed all around the map, so try to not stay at ground level too much to see where you're most needed. If you're ever on the run, just make sure you're running to a spot, that way you can cause that damage. Because if you're running around with no ink, you're going to be having some problems with this weapon. And during an extra wave, with the DPS of the Sploosh-O-Matic, if you can focus that and the Splat charger on the Kohozuna, then those two weapons should be able to melt his health pretty well. And then the Undercover Umbrella and the Luna Blaster can focus on lessers and bosses. And remember that the fish fry comes up before the stage rotation, so if you want to catch these updates when they're hot and fresh, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. And if you want other Grizzco employees to receive these tips, make sure you like and share the video. Bye-bye.